All right. Happy to be here tonight. Pastor Jerry, thank you so much for the opportunity. Frank, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I am Pastor Joe Silvestri from Worcester Bible Church. This is my wife Karen and best friend. And then next is Michelle Silvestri, our daughter-in-law, and also Rochelle Silvestri, our other daughter-in-law. And by the way, I was looking through the notes. Silvestri is two I's. There's no Y in there. So I always tell people 2 I's, no Y, because they always want to either make it Sylvester the cat or they want to do Sylvester with a Y and then finish it off creatively on the end. But what I want to do tonight is just start off with talking about this book that was recommended to me by one of our homeschooling mommies. And it's Weapons of Mass Instruction, written by a 30-year veteran teacher in Manhattan. And his name is John Taylor Gatto. The subtitle is A School Teacher's Journey Through the Dark World of Compulsory Schooling. And again, this comes from a gentleman who taught for 30 years. So one of the things that he likes to bring out, and a thought I want to give you at the beginning and also at the end, is we've become a non-thinking nation and a mind-controlled nation, and we need to think outside the box in everything that we approach today. And that's something that he brings out. He brings out this. He says, you know what, the saddest people on the earth are the ones who go back to college reunions. 35% of all college graduates regret the waste of time and money, and they wish that they had not attended. That's 35%. 50% say that they did not learn anything useful in college. So he goes on to bring out the fact that an educational system that we have and that we have had, and it's been for a long time, has been deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, and to deny students appreciable leadership skills, and then to ensure that the population is a population of what he calls docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable. So again, I think we've been seeing it over the past few years especially, but a lot of this has been going on for 50 years, 100 years, and some of it even longer than that. So he said this is what they want to do. The end goal is this. The end goal of our present educational system is to strip the students of responsibility and independence. So you stop and think about that. Strip them of responsibility and independence. Interesting note that he makes here. And we're going to go back, this will help you out. Go back to the population of the United States of America during World War II, then the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War. So back in World War II, from the dates 1942 to 1944, we had a literacy rate in the United States of America of 96%. Pretty awesome, pretty phenomenal, great standard. 1942 to 44, literacy rate of 96%. By the time we hit the Korean War, about 1950, about a decade later, the literacy rate is down to 81%. And they're gathering this data from the people in our armed services. So they're doing testing and they're watching these people and they're saying, okay, so we started out World War II, 96%, 1950 Korean War, 81%. By the time we get to the 60s, and a lot of us can relate to the 60s and 70s back then, but you had the Vietnam War, and the literacy rate went down to 73%. That is not a mistake. And he said this. He said, this all happened in spite of the fact that they spent 350% more on education, on schooling, as time went on. So we spent more and more money on schooling, and the literacy rate went down 96, 81, 73%. And he said this, he said the goal of that educational system is to alienate children from their families. 1, 2, 3, 4 things that he mentions. We want to alienate them from their families, from their traditions, from their religions, and from their cultures. And then the biggest, another great, I won't say the biggest, but another great push that they wanted to do, they wanted to create a generation of consumers, not producers. And when we stop and think back on our generation, that's what they did. And it was the throwaway generation. They taught us to be consumers, and that was the goal. Not producers and not productive. To make people passive and not active. He mentions 5 American traditions that really set us apart as a nation. He said, number 1, we had a spirit of independence. Number 2, we had a spirit of self-reliance. Number 3, we had ingenuity. Number 4, we had an emphasis upon family. And number 5, an emphasis on, again, religious worship. So he says this, a 30-year veteran says, from the first month of my teaching, I realized that intellectual power, creative insight, and good character were being diminished in my classroom. And that indeed I had been hired for specifically that purpose, and precisely that purpose. He said, I was a clerk in a vast penitentiary, and the rules and all the procedures were the guards. So he makes a distinction, and this is what you have to get. He makes a distinction between education, which is a good thing, and schooling, which is not a good thing. So a distinction between education, and that should be lifelong. We talk about lifelong learning. It should be lifelong education. We should be learning something new every day. So a distinction between education and schooling. He uses some great illustrations, and one of them is called the trapped flea principle. And being Americans who love our pets, we should know something about fleas, okay? So this is called the trapped flea principle. And he says, here's what you do. You put some fleas in a container, and immediately what are they going to do? They're going to jump out of the container. But he said you do a very simple thing. You put a lid on that container, and once they hit that lid and they fall back down in the container, you've already trained them, and they give up their quest for freedom. They don't even try to get out of the dish anymore. After that lid is removed, the fleas remain imprisoned by their own selves, by their own self-policing, he calls it. And so it is with life. Most of us let our own fears and or impositions of others imprison us in a world of low expectations. And that's a part of the educational thing, is low expectations. And then he gives the illustration of training horses. He said you want to keep them predominantly idle. Think about a classroom. Keep them apart from the other horses. You isolate them. Now, I hope you're thinking tonight and thinking back over the past 2 years of what happened to us as a nation. Because we were isolated, and we were isolated for a reason, and that was part of a plan and part of a purpose to affect us. He says, and then you create an animal that interacts with the world in a way that's clearly unnatural. They become timid, they become crazy, they become undependable, they bolt, they buck, they become shy, they avoid other horses.
He said, you keep them from accessing the wisdom of the herd and the wisdom of their own nature. And then you end up with a horse that doesn't know where it belongs in the world. A nowhere man, back from my generation. He says, under such conditions, well-bred horses with tremendous potentials end up living their lives as consumers again instead of contributors. And he said, no condition stimulates consumption like boredom. So if you want a population of consumers, you bore them to death and they have to find something to go out and consume, something to buy. And if we want to be honest about it, we've become that generation, those people. On pages 149 to 151, he talks about educated people in his book. And he said this, he talks about standardization of the educational process, and he talks about standardized testing. And he says what happens, that cripples the imagination, and the imagination has always been the driving engine of our powerful economy in the United States of America. So he said what they do is they poison the population. And we've seen it happen. If liberty was being curtailed in one area, he said license was encouraged in every other area to break down traditional morality. I was born in 1953, and I saw this happen in my generation. Something drastic happened in my generation. And I could go into that, but that's another topic for another day. But he says this, whether it's sex, marriage, religion, family, or the training of the young, an anything goes ethic was introduced, and that was in my generation, and it was promoted steadily. A development which undercut any opposition from traditional moral centers by dividing children in school from their traditional sources of moral training at home. Then he mentions a gentleman, Charles Pierce, and he's the gentleman who influenced William James and also John Dewey. You might be a little more familiar with the name John Dewey. Listen to Pierce's mind at work. This is in the 1870s, as he contemplated the advent of forced compulsory education. Quote, let the will of the state act then instead of that of the individual. Let an institution be created which shall have for its object to keep correct doctrines before the attention of the people, to reiterate those doctrines perpetually, and to teach them to the young, having at the same time power to prevent contrary doctrines from being taught, advocated, or expressed. I think today we would call it cancel culture. We would call it being censored, censorship. So this is nothing new. That was said in the 1870s. Let all possible causes of a change of mind be removed from man's apprehension. Let them be kept ignorant, lest they should learn of some reason to think otherwise than how they do think. Let their passions be enlisted so that they may respond unusual opinions with hatred and horror. And we've seen that in our nation just over the past 2 years. Then let all men who reject the established belief be terrified into silence. Same blueprint, folks. And abandoning knowledge is a goal. This is the doctrine which drove William James in Principles of Psychology in 1890 to assign habit training, not intellectual development. So what we have going on is no longer intellectual development, but habit training. And that has taken the place of honor in our schooling. want to share with you, he was asked to come and speak at a high school. It was Highland High School, not the Highland that we know in this area of Ohio. But the author was, during his lecture, they brought the police in. And he was almost arrested for lecturing to a senior class at a wealthy high school in Rockland County, New York. He was revealing, you say, what was his crime? He was revealing the GPAs, the grade point averages, and the SAT scores of American presidents and other prominent individuals when a squad of police came in, halted his lecture at the request of the superintendent of the school. Now, just to share with you briefly, just to whet your appetite, the C students included Al Gore, John Kennedy, John Kerry, George Bush, and John McCain, who, by the way, finished 895th out of a class of 900 graduates at Annapolis, and he lost 5 airplanes, of which he was the pilot. So these people had no difficulty being admitted to elite colleges and graduating from those colleges. No one at Highland High in New York, and this is where we are today, and I hope you get this, because it's not only in Highland High, New York, Rockland County. No one at Highland High in New York was allowed to hear the facts. Let me repeat that. No one was allowed to hear the facts that are recorded in this book. As long as ordinary Americans like Ben Franklin's dad were in charge of educating their young, America escaped domination from the deadly assumptions of permanent inferiority, whether it's spiritual, intellectual, or biological. America was a place of miracles for ordinary people, and that was done through self-education. Might we be a part of the movement? Might we be a part in this hour, a part of the army, to get us back to the place of miracles for ordinary people through self-education and by thinking outside the box. Over the last 50 years, we've watched the conspirators as they work to destroy the USA. You know, we heard a gentleman just this week, he said this, he said, I'm just about out of conspiracy theories because they've proven them all to be facts. And he said, I need to go out and find some new conspiracy theories because I'm all out of them. And over the last 50 years, we've watched the conspirators as they've worked to destroy the United States of America. Whether it was government, whether it's education, whether it's medical, whether it's media, or now the churches. And there's a great video out called Enemies Within the Church that you need to make sure you get your hands on and you need to watch, because the long and short of it is China did a survey a couple of years ago and said, why is America still beyond our reach? Why are they superior to Russians? Why are they superior to Germany? Why are they superior to any other nation? And the Chinese communists came to the conclusion it was because of our churches. So they said this: we've infiltrated education, we've infiltrated government, we've infiltrated just about everything under the sun, but we haven't infiltrated the churches, so that's our next agenda. And they're busy doing that. And in that video, you'll hear some names and some people who have bought into the new ideas for a better way. So government, education, medical, media, now the churches. Some of this has been going on, as I said at the beginning, for over 100 years. And I want to conclude with a quote from Matt Staver, Liberty Council Action. He said this, and we all know this. He said, we live in challenging times. The Bible said perilous times.
He said, but fear and discouragement are not options. The difference between success or failure, victory or defeat, is one person willing to stand up for the truth. And that's why I'm here tonight. I'm one person willing to stand up for the truth, and I brought another person and another person and another person who's willing to stand up for the truth. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my wife, Karen Silvestri, and who's been a homeschooler, and we homeschooled our 4 children, and she'll tell you a little bit about that experience.
Okay, as he said, I'm Karen Silvestri. We had 4 children. We have 4 children, and we homeschooled them for, one of them for 12 years, and the other ones at various, we began later, and so they weren't all homeschooled the whole way through. But I'm going to start out with I started reading this book too, so I can't help but tell you some of the things that are in this book that we kind of saw from the beginning. Like when we started homeschooling, it was 30 years ago when we first moved here to Ohio. And so we were kind of pretty much in the pioneer stage of homeschooling. And so we learned a lot of this stuff just by doing it. But he points out some things in the book that I want to bring forth to you, because they really have a lot to do with why we homeschooled, our decision to do that. This is John Taylor Gatto in Weapons of Mass Destruction. And he already, my husband already touched on this, but schooling, he says, schooling is a matter of habit and attitude training, and it takes place from the outside in, which isn't a bad thing if it's the right person doing that. Education is a matter of self-mastery first, and this is his definition. Self-mastery first, then self-enlargement, even self-transcendence, as all possibilities of the human spirit open themselves into zones for exploration and understanding. He says there are points when the two conditions inform one another, but in schooling, somebody else's agenda is always uppermost. You can easily compensate for lack of schooling, but without education, you will stumble through life, a sitting duck for exploitation and failure, no matter how much money you make. And I think that's a great point that he keeps hammering back to in the book, is that you will lack genuine life skills. And a lot of people who make a lot of money, we can't necessarily call them successful, because in whose eyes are they successful? Is their marriage good? Is their life good? Are they happy? Are they fulfilled? And as a Christian, are they doing what God created them to do? And if they are, then they would be fulfilled. But education cannot give you the training you need for life. And that's why we chose to homeschool our kids. It's quite rare, he says, for an inventive person in any field to trace success to school training. Education must be largely self-initiated. And the takeaway from that I got from his book is kids need time for exploration. They need time to explore the world around them, each other, themselves. And it really is so important for our kids. And it's a shame to see our kids being destroyed. You take those little lives that could really be something for the Lord Jesus Christ and the way he created them. But that's why we're here, to encourage others to go there with homeschooling. Okay, he points out somebody named Seymour Papert, and I might not be pronouncing that right. You've probably never heard of him, but he was an instructor at MIT at the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and he was kind of a pioneer in artificial intelligence. He said in his book, Mindstorms, that all learning, and this is really important, all learning can be learned as the child learns to talk, painlessly, successfully, and without organized instruction. And I remember before we homeschooled, we really looked into it. We didn't want to wreck our kids. So we were, concerned about this. Can we do this? Are we able to do this? We're not professionals. How can we, homeschool our kids? But in one of the books that we read, the author pointed out, by the time a child is 2 or 3, you've already taught that child a foreign language from scratch. And if you just continue, you've taught him, and by 5, they learn pretty much most of the life skills that they're going to need for their whole life. And you, Mommy, have taught that before they even go to kindergarten. So what makes you think you can't continue? You've already done the hard part. You've done the hardest part. And now you just build on that foundation, which I thought that really gave me a lot of confidence for homeschooling. But Seymour Papert said in his book Mindstorms that all learning can be learned the same way as a child learns to talk painlessly, successfully, and without organized instruction. He was a pioneer of constructivism, Papert, which is learning through making or learning through doing. And he talked about making models of ideas. If kids do it with their hands, they'll learn it. And I think that that's important. He says a big secret of bulk process schooling is that it doesn't teach the way kids learn. A bigger secret is that it isn't supposed to teach self-direction at all. One of the things that we focused on in our homeschool is things that he talks about in this book. He says, keep it simple and happy. Kids will shut down if they're upset, and less is more, okay? In homeschooling, less is more. Wait a minute, I think I got ahead of myself here. Okay. John Gatto says, those who excel, number 1, have a chance to think about serious matters. They have a chance to live a significant life. They have a chance to add value to their family and community. And that's one thing that you can give them in homeschooling. You teach them household chores. You teach them how to work. We taught our kids how to work from the time they were little. In fact, Rochelle's husband, our son, our youngest son, was helping with his brothers with the paper route when he was 2. He would take the paper, this was in New York City. We lived, we had different paper routes, so we would take them because it wasn't really a safe neighborhood where we were delivering papers. But we'd have the station wagon there, and he'd take his little paper and he'd toddle up, and he knew right where the people wanted the paper, and he'd put it there and toddle back to the car. So he was doing something. He was contributing to our family, contributing to our community from the time he was little. And then the other thing is they have a chance to follow their own instincts and ambitions, which is so good, and that's what we so stifle in our schools. Now, why we've chose to homeschool. My husband was a youth director, a secondary school supervisor, and principal of the school where we were in our church in New York. It was a K through 12 school for 16 years. So we knew what we were doing with education, pretty much. So the reason that we chose to homeschool is our kids went to that school up to the time when we moved here. And what I really didn't like about it, even though it was a Christian school and it was all our people, there was so much time wasted in school. My kids would come home with 2 hours of homework. And I was telling the girls on the way here tonight, I wanted to enjoy them then. They've been cooped up all day in school. Now I want to play with them. I want to enjoy my kids. We want to do fun things. And now I got to sit there like a Gestapo and make them do their homework after they've been cooped up in school for 7 hours already. It was torture for me. And I'm like, oh, I hate homework. So that was one of the reasons why we homeschooled. Because I thought if I'm going to teach my kids, if I'm going to spend 2 hours teaching them at night, I could get this all done by noon. And then we can have a fun time together, which is what we did. The kids were bored in school, waiting for the other people in the class to catch up. The other reason is we knew we could do a better job one-on-one. We could finish within 4 hours a day and allow time for creative learning where they could explore and do fun things and build things with their hands. One of the main things that really was important to me is when my kids were in school, if they had a random, important life question, a stranger was giving them that answer. And I taught in the school, so I know the things that the kids would say to their teachers. And I thought, I don't know what kind of answers they're getting from that teacher, and they might never tell me. They might forget all about it and go on and have a wrong concept for their whole life. But if they're with me and that question comes up, I know I can give them a scriptural answer for it and a right answer. And their little minds, sometimes some things take a long time to undo if they're, incorrect. The results of our homeschool. And this is just, my kids are normal people. They're not like, anything extraordinary. They're normal kids.
They're not?
Well, yeah, but I think they are. But it's, they're leaders. And I think because of being homeschooled, we cultivated them to think for themselves, to be able to stand in the midst of everything and to do the right thing. But because they had to take charge of their own life, now they're able to take charge in whatever situation they're in if nobody else steps forward. Rachel's our oldest. She has a biochem degree from the College of Worcester. She's a nurse, and she's the director of infection control at Worcester Community Hospital. David had a biology degree when he was from the College of Worcester at age 20. He started college when he was 15 or 16. And we did some out of the ordinary things with him, because each of our children was important and each of them was unique. So we tailored their education to their needs, to where they were. So David got that biology degree at age 20. He's been on city council for how many years? 16 years. And he's the co-pastor at our church. Our son Joseph, who lives in New Jersey, got a sales and marketing degree from Akron U. He's an iron worker in New York City, and he holds supervisor positions on a lot of the jobs that he goes on. And John, our youngest, who's married to Rochelle, has his own business. He started his own business because of COVID, and he has several people working for him. So I said all that just because they were trained to be leaders, and that was important to us. Okay, this is what we learned. There's a whole lot when homeschool is thrown at you, it's daunting. It's like you think, oh my gosh, I could never do this. But the key that we've learned after 12 years of homeschooling is keep it simple and keep it happy. Make it a happy home. Kids will shut down if they're upset, okay? If they get upset with it, they'll shut down and you might as well close up shop for the day because they're not going to learn anything. They're just going to be upset. And less is more with homeschooling. I think because just the way that you taught your kids how to speak a language. Did you sit down at a table with them and give them a book and say, this is how you form this word? No, you taught them the language just in everyday life as you're walking and doing things together. And that's the same way that homeschooling works. It's not the traditional sit in a classroom situation. If we need to teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I know that sounds primitive, but that's exactly what they need. And reading, we used Abeka, and I'm not promoting one curriculum over another, but my husband saw a lot of curricula when we were in the school in New York. They all came across his desk. And Abeka, we believe, has the best phonics program, the best way of teaching a child how to read, so they'll be able to read well. Bob Jones is good too, but I prefer Abeka because I think there's a lot of repetition, and just the way that they do it is really good. So if they can read well, they can learn anything. And if you foster in them a love for reading, then they will learn everything. And Michelle could tell you about her oldest, who always has a book in her hand. She's every time you see her, she's got a book in her hand, and she loves to read. And the kids, the other four, love it when she sits on the couch and reads to them. She'll do that for hours. She'll read a whole series of books to them. And that's so good for them. So reading is good. Writing, and with writing I put down penmanship, because I think we've lost penmanship in our days now. And penmanship teaches discipline and dignity. Because when you write, that's you putting yourself on paper. And your signature says something about you. So I think penmanship is important. I wouldn't overdo it on that, but I think it's important. Arithmetic, they're going to need arithmetic for life skills, like how to balance their checkbook. Not anymore, we can go online and do it, but they need to know, how to take care of things like that, and recipes. If you teach them fractions, they're going to need to know that kind of stuff. So reading, writing, arithmetic, and character. If you can teach them character, they're going to be head and shoulders above any other kid who doesn't have character. And I think that is paramount, is teaching our kids character. And that can only be taught by you living and showing them Jesus Christ in your life. They need to see you reacting and responding right to situations. Okay. Facilitate and cultivate in them a love for learning and a sense of adventure. Make it fun. Be creative and flexible. Remember that as you're homeschooling. Don't get stuck in a box. Be creative, very creative, and flexible. I had the littlest one, when he was 4, used to bound into my room every morning and say, "Mom, what are we going to do fun today?" And I'm like, my eyes aren't even open. What would a 4-year-old think is going to be fun today? And it can't be the same thing you did yesterday, because that's all over with. So now you have to come up with something else fun to do. So it's not easy. It's not easy being a homeschool mom, but it's rewarding. It really is. And if you can get into it and get into the creative part, it really is rewarding. For each of them, know their unique strengths and weaknesses, and their interests, their innermost desires. And who knows them better than you do, Mom? So if you do that, if you get into their little heads and figure out what makes them tick, then you can adapt their schooling for their personality, for their strengths and weaknesses. Above all, pray for inspiring ideas for each individual child and keep their well-being and future paramount. Sometimes parents want what they want for their kids instead of what they need and what God wants for their kids. They belong to God, and you have been entrusted with training them to know God, to love and obey Him, and to be what He created them to be. That's your job as a mom, and I think that's really important. Psalm 123, 3-5 says, "Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." And I like how the Lord likens children to arrows. You're just supposed to point them in the right direction and then give them that little boost and let God direct where He wants their life to go. John 10:10 says, "The thief cometh not, but for to steal and to kill and to destroy." And don't we see that right now in our world? Jesus Christ said, "I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly." So it'll make an abundant life if you can do that with your kids.